and welcome to Respawn Volume 7. I'm Colby.
And I'm Derek, and I got the numbers wrong last time. When we talked on Blah Blah last time, I thought this volume was going to take us up to issue 50, which I was really excited about. I was actually a volume ahead. This is 39 through 44.
Yes. So
of Spawn.
We will get there next volume, but that being said, this is a very interesting point in Spawn's history, because I mentioned it last volume, but we are at the point now where, and even off mic I just said this, where we're kind of hitting these books that I just feel like are Todd and his team of Capullo and Daniels really hitting their stride and just writing Spawn books. Like, these just are good Spawn books.
That's basically the long and short of it. If you don't want to listen to the next however many minutes you're going to hear us talk, spoiler alert, we both come out on the opinion that this is just good quality Spawn. It's not there's one spectacular moment in here that we're definitely going to talk about, and I am going to make a comparison to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four run sometime during this podcast, so look out for that. But the overarching feeling, these are good comics.
Yeah, one thing this volume in particular sets up, and something that would start happening a lot more, is Todd juggling a lot of like A, B, and C storylines, but actually doing it pretty well for the most part.
Way better than he's done in the past.
Yeah.
His pacing and his time management as a writer have definitely improved as of this volume, for sure.
And some of the things we'll talk about, and I'm also going to mention them here because, again, they bleed into one another. Throughout this volume, you have the what was set up in Volume 6 of Cy-Gor. You have the Cy-Gor story of like heading towards New York throughout pretty much all of these, except for the first and last issue, going on in the background. You have the storyline of Banks firing Sam and Twitch and the ramifications of Sam and Twitch and taking that information forward. And in the midst of that, you have Spawn being broken down again and having to be rebuilt again, essentially.
Right. And actually, that kind of plays into something I want to talk about later as well, since we kind of sort of had that with the aftermath of the Angela miniseries, though not quite to the extent that we're going to see in this volume.
Yeah.
Before we get to the individual issues, and I do feel like this is another one of those volumes where going through it issue by issue seems to make the most sense. Because like I said, there's a lot of subplots that keep them through, but the overarching main plot seemed to be very issue-centric, issue by issue. Before we get into that, if you've been following along with us actually reading the Origins volumes versus reading the individual issues, you know that every volume opens with a quote from Todd Mcfarlane, usually something from the letters column, occasionally something from an interview. And this one just opens with Todd Mcfarlane. I'll read a piece of it here. If we just begin to take small pieces of a story, then we can give a fairly biased and unclear view of unclear view, because that word is misspelled, of what the story is actually trying to tell. Taken out of context, there are many acts of violence in the Bible, but as you read further into each story, a reason and rationale is given for each act of what looks like senseless violence. Given that the reason adults try to protect their children from such content is because they believe boys and girls are so heavily influenced by what they see and read. I felt like pointing that out because, and this goes all the way back to Mcfarlane doing adjectiveless Spider-Man back for Marvel.
Yeah.
Todd Mcfarlane does not do well responding to criticisms of his work. Yeah. He tries. But I think he gets a little too high-minded for himself. Yeah. And it's really funny to read these, especially now, and read just how self-serious he was at this time.
Well, I think...
yes, please, go ahead.
I wonder how much of that is... I kind of put in the same boat of like Quentin Tarantino or Robert Rodriguez, where I really wonder how much of that is when you're criticized for the same stuff over and over, and you've given... Because I think he's probably a good example in the similar... Tarantino, where he's given like 2 or 3 really good explanations, but every time he reiterates, you can tell it gets a little bit more like, I am so tired of dealing with being asked about violence and religion in my comic book.
Right.
Please just...
That he's just popping off a road answer at this point. That's fair. I remember there was, I remember reading, he had a response to somebody talking about something that happened in the Torment story arc back in Adjectival Spider-Man, and he gave this response about how he wanted to do a story where not everything worked out okay in the end, and it didn't really answer the person's question, and it just kind of felt like, I don't know, it just there was a weird kind of fuck it whatever attitude to the answer, but also kind of a self-important, I am the writer and this is my story, and kind of the way that and forgive me for this, Neil Gaiman can kind of get a little high and mighty at times with his I am a teller of tales shtick that he does. So I don't know, it just occasionally it feels like somebody needs to let the wind out of McFarlane just a touch with a situation like this. Again, not saying it's bad, not saying he's a bad writer, but sometimes his response to letter writers or to critics feels a little. And I actually think your comparison to Tarantino and Rodriguez is a good comparison, where it's just like, I'm so fucking tired of dealing with this.
Yeah.
Here I'm just gonna slather on the bullshit and walk away. Or Stephen King. 9 times out of 10, Stephen King gives a funny answer to what scares you, because the dude answers that question basically every goddamn interview for the last 50 years. So that's actually a fair comparison as well, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the problem with being in the limelight in a very specific genre, where everyone thinks they have a very clever point of view, but most people kind of just have the same point of view when it comes to your work.
Yeah.
And when you're asked that same question over and over, I think it wears on people. And I do think people like Todd McFarlane, especially at this point where he is still kind of a very, very faint. This is at the point getting to the peak of Image, where they were literally in magazines and like. They even reference the Liefeld magazine jeans ad and stuff.
Yeah.
I think this is that point where it's like you also have him at his most confident and cockiest, because this is also a time where you're starting to get like, I think you're getting the beginnings of the toys and the video games and everything else really coming into making money for him instead of just being made.
Right. I want to say this was when the toys were really starting to take off.
Which, by the way, randomly, this ties in actually this perfectly. Just that announcement that Walmart is carrying a new McFarlane line of toys, all based around Cy-Gor.
Which is so fucking weird, but also I am so totally going to buy at least one of those figures.
Yeah, I know.
I can't not. They look cool, and again, kind of a spoiler for this podcast, I am really kind of falling in love with Cy-Gor.
Yeah, Cy-Gor, and this is one I had forgotten, because I haven't read, I've read the Cy-Gor miniseries, and I've read this stuff forever ago, but I had forgotten how, because even when people ask me, stuff like Cy-Gor sounds like one of the more ridiculous elements of Spawn.
Yeah.
Again, it sounds like, the typical of, that era of comics of it's a cybernetic creature.
Very 90s. Yeah.
It's a cybernetic creature. It's it's the Ninja Turtles. It's Battletoads. All the other stuff. We need a crazy character. But how he handles it, taking it for one, it's honestly kind of a stroke of brilliance to make it a serious Frankenstein tale version of that kind of character.
It really tugs at my King Kong loving heart.
Yeah.
It really plays on those same strings, and you're absolutely right. The fact that he takes Cy-Gor so seriously makes us as readers take him more seriously than I think we would have been prone to, and it is shocking how empathetic that character ends up being. Again, not to keep ragging on the last volume, which I really did not like. I went into that volume expecting to be like, hell yeah, the freak, and oh Jesus, Cyborg, and it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
If I never saw the freak again, I'd be totally fine. But I'm actually pretty invested in Cy-Gor right now.
Yeah, and actually we'll jump into stories before we get too far, because 39 is an interesting one, because it's a famous issue in the Spawn history, because it is the Christmas issue, and it's honestly, I think it's a fun, quick read, and not a ton happens. You have a kid that's left alone for Christmas.
I gotta say, I was so terrified for Greggy throughout. For the first half of this issue, I was on the edge of my seat, tears pricking my eyes, oh God, what horrible fate is going to befall this child.
That is one thing that McFarlane in this one uses to his great advantage of, we know what kind of book Spawn is, and I'm with you, the way it's written, the way it's set up, it sounds like something horrible is going to happen, because you have this kid left alone, with his sister supposed to be watching him because his mom's got to go work for Christmas. The sister runs out to go to a party. You have these criminals that Spawn is fighting on top of the roof, who he thinks is the reindeer and Santa. And it's framed you keep expecting this horrible thing to happen. And instead, nothing horrible. I mean, they had this funny, like, little sweet moment of him thinking Spawn of Santa and the reindeer are the criminals, and he believes that Santa forgot his house. There's no new presents, and one of the criminals just drops a ton of money and gives it to his mom as a Christmas present, and she throws a giant party for everyone in the apartment complex. It's actually a really nice Spawn moment for Christmas.
It's an incredibly sweet issue, and honestly, that was another one. The ending where Greg's mom does what Greg's mom does with the money, I feel like is a high point of the franchise so far.
Yeah.
Mcfarlane hits just the right tone for it, and again, it shows an emotional empathy and sensitivity that people don't remember Mcfarlane has.
Yeah, and it's weird because especially reading these issues, we're getting a shit ton of these great moments. Like these, like every volume so far has had at least 2 or 3 moments where we're taken aback by this is handled really well and really heartfelt.
And there's a subtlety to the melodrama that we keep being blindsided by. And again, you think 7 volumes and about 44 issues in by the end of this volume, we would stop being so surprised by it. But maybe it's the reputation. Maybe it's the fact that Todd McFarlane is a bit of an egomaniac. He is a very, very confident writer and self-promoter. You kind of forget he's very in touch with his emotions at times.
Also,
and this issue is very much one of those.
Should mention, speaking of Todd McFarlane, he just had a new documentary on Sci-Fi that came out, I think, last night.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah. Yes, you're right. I was like, I thought it was next week, but no, it just came out. I'm going to have to figure out what streaming service it is on.
I think it's for free on Sci-Fi's website now. Okay.
That is something that you and I may have to do like a Spawn special episode about. We'll talk about that after the show. The other thing that really kind of surprised me, I'm going to say 60-40. I feel like McFarlane's humor tends to fall flat. I don't think his attempts at jokes versus the jokes that land, I don't think he has a necessarily great track record with. Sure. This issue is legitimately funny.
Yeah, there's the
way he does funny violence with Spawn and the thugs that Spawn is defeating. It's hilarious. It's really, really good.
It is because again, if you're reading the issue, essentially the moment where the kid's watching this Christmas special and Santa Claus is explaining all the different reindeer, and it's correlating with the violence that's going on. There's like a great one of, Rudolph with his great red nose and a Spawn punching a dude, breaking his nose, and blood splattering out. There's a few where it's like, with the bells ringing, and it's the chains flowing in the wind. For fucking Spawn, for any superhero, this is one of the best Christmas issues of a comic book I've read, to be honest.
Same here, and honestly, I didn't realize it was famous for that because, it deserves to be, and I'm happy to hear it, but I did not know that.
It's got that great Santa Spawn cover that a lot of people love.
Yes, that's again, man, Capullo fucking murders the covers.
Yeah.
For this
we should admit throughout this you have Capullo and Daniel going back and forth every other issue on art, and
you notice, for the most part, the Cy-Gor stuff are in Daniel's issues, which makes sense because Daniel co-created the visual of the character, and I really appreciated that. Yeah. I thought that was really good.
There's a lot of really nice little touches, and there's not. Again, this issue, the first issue in here, it's an interesting one because it kind of, a lot of the issues we mentioned don't necessarily tie into the grander scheme outside of a couple of back details, and this one especially is very much a one and done little Christmas tale, and it does set up something that we'll talk more here a little about, but an interesting notion where in every Spawn volume now, we've had a big focus on kids in difficult housing situations or living situations.
Yeah, and again, I don't really want to talk about this until we get to Fanboy, which is later in this volume. But that is definitely something that I've picked up on, and something I want to discuss about McFarlane as a creator. I do want to talk a little bit, just a tiny bit, about the art in this volume, because I have a big compliment and kind of a knock against Capullo. I'll talk about the negative first. He really overplays the doe eyes on Greggy. There's like 3 or 4 damn near splash pages where that kid's eyes are bigger than anime eyes. It's a good effect, but I think he overdoes it.
Yeah, Mcfarlane and Capullo, when they draw kids, they love doing the big eyes, and I mean, it works. It always works. But I know what you mean. Where it is like there's several extra cute moments, and I think my one reason I can kind of forgive it, I think it does play into a little bit of your expectations of expecting something horrible. Yeah, you're expecting some horrible violator to break in the apartment and do something, or the freak
these thugs are going to take him hostage and hold him against Spawn, and Spawn's going to do something terrible that doesn't quite save the day, a la issue 28.
Yeah.
The art compliment I have to give. It's one panel, and it's where the sister is pushing the VHS cassette into the player, and her nails, the paint chipping on her nails, is such a beautifully subtle and realistic detail for a character of her age and her gender that I kind of fell in love with that panel. If that makes any sense,
no, it doesn't.
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect storytelling.
We should also give credit to that on a lot of that. You have Mcfarlane himself in a lot of the inks on it, including that that issue included. And you have like a lot of like the entire. Again, this is one of those moments where like the entire team is coming together in a really fascinating way to kind of have. You have these almost two, but because you have Capullo and Daniels, you do have two different visual styles for Spawn, but both of them work really well with the issues and materials they're given, surprisingly.
Right, and I think since you have Mcfarlane inking the majority of these issues, he does give it the art is similar. It's not too jarring switching back and forth between these two artists, despite the fact that, like you said, they are two different artists with two different artistic styles, who have grown in very different ways artistically. I mean, you would not have a book where Capullo and Tony Daniel traded art chores now and say these are complementary styles.
Oh no, nowadays it would be there would never be a question or a doubt of who did what, like ever.
Exactly.
Speaking of that, we may talk about these next issues back to back, because 40 and 41 are Fugitives Part 1 and Part 2, and kind of tell the same story. Where this is where we have Cy-Gor in the background being set up, and you have what starts with a little bit, but basically the first important thing in issue 40, you have Spawn being kidnapped.
By Curse, who, man, I am really kind of fascinated by Curse as a villain, because as far as I can tell, he's an augmented human. He performs more or less, it looks like, his own surgery, adding to his cybernetics. But it's a guy, a religious fanatic who keeps getting the drop on Spawn, and it's just kind of fascinating to me, because again, it feels like one thing that Mcfarlane was trying to build up is that Al Simmons was this master assassin. Al Simmons would never have gotten caught in so easy a trap, but Spawn does. And I wonder, is Mcfarlane trying to say something about Spawn's addled state? Is, are Al's credentials being oversold by people who worked with him? Is his legend grown in his death and the telling? I'm curious as to what the story point is of this. I don't dislike it, but I am curious as to what he's trying to do with this, because Curse fascinates me. It feels like Curse, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Okay. It feels like Curse shouldn't be able to do what he has shown being capable of doing, and yet I really like him as a villain, and I want to see him continue to just fuck up Spawn's world the way he has up to this point, because he does such a good job of it. Also, Tony Daniel's art is so much better in this issue than it was just one issue prior, because he did the issue before Noel, which was fine, but I definitely had some complaints about the art. Daniel, and again, maybe it's Mcfarlane inking, this issue is head and shoulders above what we've seen from him before. And I know we already talked about Daniel a little bit, but he's a growing artist with this book for sure.
For sure, and I think it growing in a good direction. And you have one thing about Curse, we're left with a lot of mystery behind the character, on top of what you've already mentioned, but like little things like his helpers we don't get like
who
shit.
seem demonic, but we have no clue.
We don't learn about them. I can't remember when we get more of like a real explanation of them. They're very interesting, like almost these evil, very much like gremlins, like the evil gremlins in Hoods, or almost like the trolls in Trolls 2, kind of like this weird, like kind of humanoid, kind of not. Mm-hmm. They're intelligent.
Well, all of their limbs are cybernetic. Mm-hmm. So we don't know if their entire body is cybernetic because everything else is hidden by hoods and cloaks. They do have the very lifelike grins and potentially eyes, but everything we actually see of them is cybernetic. Curse may have just built all of these guys, but we don't know. And again, that makes him such a fascinating villain to me. I don't know why. I did not expect on his first appearance for me to be so invested in Curse as a villain.
Yeah. You have you do have Wanda and Terry in the background doing stuff, and this is where we get Cy-Gor set up as these hunting team. You also have another kid introduced here, like fishing, but fishing in the area they're calling dangerous because there's been Bigfoot sightings, and of course we learned that it's Cy-Gor.
Yeah. And then also a little bit more with Clown and Jason, slowly developing that story. I gotta say, if we're kind of jumping ahead and talking about issue 41 as well, Fugitive Part 2, I wish I loved anything as much as Todd McFarlane loves opening a comic with a block of text.
Yeah, I will say issue 40 you end off with a big like Curse as dissected Spawn and cut him in half and taking his symbiote suit off.
Wonderful cliffhanger.
Yeah, it's great. And then you open up and you're right with this giant. And luckily in this volume, you only specifically have one big thing of text and one news scene. But they always, when they pop up, I can't help but be a little bit like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Because even this big text, the problem with McFarlane's big text is he loves to death. And it always, and I love McFarlane, I love Spawn, it almost always just reiterates everything you know and doesn't necessarily add a lot to this comic.
I will say this one, though, does in that I think this is the first time we've ever actually had it, like, unambiguously established.
Sure.
Spawns are literally hell's angels.
Yeah.
What heaven does for angels, hell does for spawns. And they really are, the Tao, yin-yang, equal opposite of each other. And I think this is the first time we've actually 100% had that confirmed in text. Yeah. But it's still, that's a lot of words to say that.
Yeah, because I think it is interesting how we are in issue 40 and we're still leading off of effects that happened in the Angela miniseries and have been set up. I mean, I will give him this. This is where you have long-term storytelling that is playing off pretty well overall.
Well, see, that's actually something I want to talk about again here in an issue or two. McFarlane does quite a bit of what we in storytelling call backfill.
Yeah.
He did something early in the series that he has now decided serves another purpose or needs to be retrofit into the current continuity. And again, much like his humor, I feel like his backfill is about 60-40. It doesn't always hit. I think the misses are bigger and more noticeable than the hits. And by misses, I mean you can tell he's doing it.
Yeah.
But when it does work, when he does settle on something, and oh my God, we are absolutely going to talk about this in probably about an issue.
Yeah.
It really does work. So I think that's why he's so obsessed with his own continuity. Is he's constantly rewriting it to make it make more sense with what he's currently doing. And sometimes it's legal. Like probably the easiest backfill to point to is, it wasn't Chapel that killed Spawn, it was Priest, and that's because of the fallout with Rob Liefeld. But also the backfill of being, Jason Wynn was responsible for hiring Chapel. That is an example of backfill, and that's a smaller one, and that's actually, again, one that kind of works a little bit better because, that actually makes sense. Otherwise, because initially, Wynn is more of a foil for Terry. Let's make him more of a foil for our protagonist. How are we going to do that? Let's make him responsible for the assassin who killed Al. Okay, that makes sense. That's a story point that makes sense. But it is backfill because you can absolutely tell that was not the initial idea for Jason Wynn. Anyway, that's a whole lot of nothing to lead up to something we're going to talk about in the future. So let's talk about this issue some more.
Yeah. So again, you have that going. You have Spawn trying his best to escape. You have actually a really interesting moment where he cuts off his own hand, so his hand can kind of become the sentient, almost Evil Dead moment of his hand punching the glass of where his suit is kept, trying to crack it open.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. It's very Evil Dead 2 in that, again, it's funny. It's intended to be funny. It's also supposed to be gross, and it's that too. It's very tonally appropriate for Spawn in a way that I really liked. Honestly, I thought Fugitive Part 2 in particular was a pretty strong issue in this volume.
No, I agree. We also get an interesting little note of a flashback of him back in the war, and the first time he talks about like learning to murder and somewhat enjoy it to a degree.
And at the very least, compartmentalize.
Yes, it's a nice little, adds a little bit more backstory in a way that, like you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily take away from it. And also, been in extreme pain, it makes sense for a flashback moment. Adds a little bit more to him pre-Spawn that we haven't really heard before.
Right.
It's a really good. You still get more Win and Clown, their relationship building up, and you get an ending that is like super fucking bombastic in a lot of ways, where you have Kurt's return, you have him finding out that, Spawn has cut his own hand off, and calling in, going through the pain, the minions trying to get the symbiote suit, they don't ever call it the uniform. They're very clear to make sure the uniform, which is, again, we'll get into this very soon, but a very interesting choice knowing what would happen next issue, and I'm also wondering if it's entirely purposeful to set up some stuff in Fanboy.
That's a good call. I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting. Because I dislike it when they call it a costume. I'm not a huge fan of when they call it a uniform, because it really is. It's its own entity. Yeah. And for me, calling it a neuroparasite or whatever, whenever they refer to it as its own particular thing, that's usually what I prefer. But that makes sense. Again, and also it is technically the uniform of a soldier of hell. Yeah. So that is actually more appropriate than costume. So.
It's not horrible, but you learn that the hand did crack glass enough for the uniform to get out. It causes chaos, starts to rebond with Spawn, starts killing all the minions and torturing the curse. As of course, we do get some more sword. Should mention the whole point of removing the costume is he's trying to gain secrets from hell, from the necroplasm inside of Spawn himself and the uniform. He's trying to, in his eyes, appease God by learning what the enemy is capable of and why they operate and what makes them tick.
Right. Which, again, is a really fascinating motivation for this character. I did not expect to find Curse such a complex character. I really do like this idea of this supposedly very heavenly villain, in the same way that you could say about Anti-Spawn the Redeemer or Angela, kind of in that same boat, but who is so comfortable using dark and evil means to achieve his goals. It's a wonderful juxtaposition, and it makes him such a great foil for Spawn. Yeah,
it really does. And you have, this kind of ends where you have Curse literally blowing up his base with Spawn inside, Spawn's suit turn into essentially a missile and shooting him out to safety.
We learn Hordak,
we learn, which I will say, going into, before we won't get into it, but it does lead into what I would like to call the issue where after McFarlane had won several legal cases and found out about parody law, because my gosh, we're getting to almost, in some ways I would call it almost a sequel to the Dave Sims, like issue 9 or 10, whatever it was. Except for in this one, I was shocked, and in 42's Fanboy, I'm just shocked what's coming up in the sense of just dropping every name and basically straight up drawing people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Not only do we have Chief Banks being a very much a 70s Stan Lee lookalike, the editor of the newspaper is editor Salicrup. Jim Salicrup was the editor of X-Men at the time. Name dropping left and right.
Yeah, name dropping. And then not only name dropping real people, but it's like straight up saying X-Force and X-Men and Spider-Man, and of course the big one being like, oh, you like Venom.
Yeah.
We should mention, though, issue 42's Fanboy, the setup is Spawn, much like we mentioned earlier, similar to the late 20s, early 30s issues where Spawn is having to recharge his suit. He's been taken to the limit. He's in this weakened point. He's hiding in the shed. We follow this little kid who is going to. He's running away from his bullies. He's a big comic fan. He's just bought a new comic book. So I guess this takes place probably on a Wednesday.
Most likely.
It's after school. He's trying to go. He encounters Spawn, and he starts in a very meta way talking to Spawn about superheroes. About again asking if he's like Venom. Because his suit's similar to Venom's, asking about...
Oh, you haven't heard about Image Comics? They're the best.
They're the best. Making a little snide comment about Liefeld's Levi's jeans commercial. Having a... Again, straight up talking about... I thought it was, especially now in the late 90s, mentioning like, oh, I love the mutants. I love X-Men, I love the mutants. I just wish their books would come out more. It's hard to keep up with their books. There's so many. And then Pitt being
is
like...
the book that he wished would come out more often. Yeah.
They're like... Again... I was just more shocked because in issue 9 or 10, the Dave Sim one, where he like very cleverly shows off characters you know who they are, but never flat out says it. This one, just fuck it. There's an X-Force comic in hand.
With a Sabretooth knockoff character on the cover.
They're dropping people left and right. It's him talking about wanting to be his own hero and his own person. I know this is a very interesting issue because this is by far stylistically way different than the rest. For one, again, this weird meta level of not only mentioning Marvel and DC like they're comic companies, but flat out mentioning Image, which threw my head for a little bit of a dilemma loop.
Right, especially because, like you were saying earlier on in this very podcast, you did not realize that Youngblood was a team in this universe where Spawn lives. Same with Savage Dragon. We've seen him on the TV in like issue 7 or 8 of that green cop in New York. But Fanboy here mentions the Savage Dragon as one of his comic book characters. It is a bit confusing, and I gotta say, this issue is actually really good. I did not love these two panels because it does feel like it's going so overboard with the references and with the too clever by half notes. But it also sets up something that I wanted to talk about, as far as especially the climax where Spawn saves Fanboy from the bullies just by, and then actually kind of goes overboard because the costume is reacting to his emotions, not his thoughts.
Yeah.
And that is, okay, this is where my weird Lee Kirby Fantastic Four comparison comes in. If you go back and you read Lee Kirby's Fantastic Four in kind of, not necessarily a wonder, but if you read it in big chunks, you can see, especially Kirby, wrestling with ideas and trying to figure things out that he maybe didn't think wasn't satisfied with the way he nailed it the first time. The easiest one to point out is the Fantastic Four going to the blue area of the moon and encountering the Watcher. That's something that initially happened in issue, I want to say 13. He does it again in issue 35, and he does it again a little bit later in the run as well. It's like he keeps going back to this idea that he can't quite seem to nail to his satisfaction.
Yeah.
Mcfarlane does that with kids in abusive or untenable situations. He started with issue 28, then we saw it with Noel, and we're seeing it again with Fanboy.
We could go back even like issue 5 and 6 because we go back to the Billy Kincaid stuff even.
Yeah, if you want to go all the way back there, absolutely. But what kind of got my noodle is with Kirby, you could tell it was because he was trying to figure something out. He was unsatisfied, and he was continuing to chew on it. I feel like, especially with issue 28. McFarlane nailed it. I mean, we talked about that in our show we did for that issue, where we were just like completely blown away by how he handled that story of childhood abuse. And yet twice within this volume, a year and change later, he's playing with these ideas again. So I'm just kind of wondering, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about... Is he trying to challenge himself to live up to that prior story? Does he feel like he didn't get the story right and he's trying to rectify it? What do you think, man? Because I don't. It's bugging me because I don't have an answer.
My personal thought about this is I think it's him looking at kind of what heroes are made for who. Where you look at the X-Men, you go, okay, this is a bunch of characters. They are for the misfits. They're for the people who don't know where they fit in. They don't know what they necessarily identify as. They just know they don't fit in with the normal people. You have Spider-Man, who like the nerdy teenager that you can feel, you can compare it to. You have Superman, the aspirational figure. I think it's him kind of trying to cement Spawn as kind of the hero for the broken down, mistreated youth.
Okay.
And I think it's because going back to how he works with whether it be the homeless people, whether it be kids, I think it's him trying to reiterate that Spawn is a broken hero made for broken people.
Okay.
And I think that's why every kid you meet always has some kind of either broken home life, they're beaten up, they're skipping school, they're not involved, they don't have friends, and even the people that Spawn normally helps are almost always very, very broken people.
Destitute, yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of think the reoccurring theme of kids is, and this is me getting way too in-depth on it, and just but I kind of think his idea for Spawn is a broken human, and the idea of him trying to, possibly the idea of Spawn, because we get a little bit in 28 of him trying to make sure, whether it be Cyan or other characters, him trying to protect kids because he doesn't want kids to end up like him. And I kind of think of a small inkling underlining of every time we see him trying to do the best for these kids, and almost always kind of fucking up, but really wanting them to be better. And I kind of think it's this weird meta way of doing that. I don't know for sure, but that's my, especially at this point in Spawn, that's my theory for it.
That's far better than anything I could come up with, and honestly, you have a lot of the evidence to show it. And it does make sense. It's because Mcfarlane also, very famously worked with Korn for a while. Yeah. Did some album covers for them, did some artwork for them, and that was kind of Korn and Jonathan Davis's big thing. Yeah. Of I was abused. This is me talking about my abuse, and. Yep. Kind of putting that out there, putting voice to that, and trying to make people feel less alone in their abuse through sharing his experience. I could absolutely see Spawn as a figure for someone who has also had that same kind of situation. That's a really good call, man. I think that nails it. Again, we don't have Todd McFarlane on the podcast to ask, but as far as a literary critical view of the series, I think that is an incredibly sharp commentary, man.
Well, thank you. I think because there are certain aspects of Spawn that pop up over and over and over again. That is one of the more underlined ones that is always there, because we'll get into. I mean, even you have that. Of course, you have Cyan that grows up a little bit. You have the evil kid twins that come up later. You have all kids are a recurring theme throughout Spawn, and I think especially in the early ones, I think that's what he's really going for here, because they always pop up in similar situations. Even the Greggy stuff in 39 is like he's got a very hard home life and he's got a very interesting one in Spawn, and it's almost funny that that's the one time Spawn isn't directly involved is the one time he accidentally helps the most.
Right, exactly, yeah. But and that's what I wanted to, mention, that there's twice in this volume he played with that idea again, once with Greggy and once with Fanboy, because Greggy is very much in a, he's not in an abusive situation, but he is very much in a broken home situation. His mother very clearly cares about him. His sister is an older sibling and has the emotions that an older sibling has for a younger sibling. You can't really be upset at her for that, but it's the way it is. And it was him touching on the very similar themes to the abuse issue, and then again with the Fanboy being kind of an outcast who gets beat up. But also, the only thing that I can say to possibly refute that point is, again, the ending of issue 28, 29, I'm actually blanking on the actual number, is incredibly bleak. The older brother shoots the cop father, and Spawn's attempt to help fails miserably. Whereas in Noel, there's money dropped and there's a giant party thrown for the tenements in the building. With Fanboy, he gets the girl he has his eye on, who he was too scared to ask out, asks him out. They get happy endings. I wonder, that's the only thing that maybe he does regret, or maybe the ending, the darker ending doesn't sit well with him, and he's trying to redeem that darker ending with some happier ones.
I think these actually might end up being really good bookends, because in the abuse issue, you have Spawn thinking he did the right thing and he left them on good terms, and it backfired. And in this one, you have Spawn thinking he fucked up, and it actually ended up helping them.
Right.
So
that is a good bookend. That's a good point.
I do think they kind of fit those pieces. The one thing I want to mention that I'm confused the fuck by is why the fuck Marv is just in the school cafeteria in the last panel.
I didn't even see that. Oh shit!
It is straight up Frank Miller Marv.
That's got to be just
in the foreground,
nod,
like
right?
in the left foreground, like it's shadowed out like him. He's got the bandages.
It certainly is. I just thought that was because of the way the nose is shaped. I just thought that was like one of the bullies that got beat up.
I think it is, but it is totally the Marv silhouette.
It's intended to be, it's calling back to the Marv silhouette.
And I think why
hilarious.
Why I caught that is because when he's like got all the posters and stuff, the only poster it's not Marvel, DC, or Image. There's a Sin City book on the ground.
Yep. Yeah.
And I thought it was like, oh, Sin City. So later, I guess I had in the back of my mind, I'm like, that is just fucking Marv.
Yeah. Oh, man, I completely missed that. That's hilarious. I love that.
We also should mention there is some more development on Cy-Gor in the background.
Yes, we get more Cy-Gor, and we also the reason I talked about backfill earlier was I had to talk about the most spectacular point of backfill we've seen up to this point. Now, before I've complained because you could tell that Todd McFarlane had not decided or realized or come up with what the quote-unquote dirt on Chief Banks was when he initially put out that concept, which is why that plot line spent issues of Sam and Twitch dancing around the office being, oh my god, we've got such great dirt on Chief Banks, and nothing came of it because he hadn't wrote it yet.
Yeah.
It's revealed in this issue. Billy Kincaid, being a gun fired at a very particular target, papers over a lot of cracks in issue 5's plot. It turns that story from a one-off story that honestly, led to a great sequel with issue 8.
Yeah.
Into an actual conspiracy. It turns it into an actually meaty story point, and it also makes more sense. It really squares issue 5 with issue 8, because in issue 5, Billy seems barely cognizant of putting together more than 3 words in a sentence.
Yeah.
Whereas he's actually talking and plotting and thinking, and seems like a more genuinely dangerous individual in issue 8. Making him. He literally was a character taken out of jail and told to murder this specific kid who is a senator's child, and making him integral to that plot, and Chief Banks being in on it, and it going all the way up to the top with Jason Wynn, is such a smart move. Story-wise, plot-wise, character-wise, it ties up so many loose ends, and like I said, papers over so many cracks that we've had since issue 5 of this book. And my jaw hit the floor when I read that, because it's so perfect. It does exactly what it needs to do for this point in the story and this character. I was flabbergasted.
No, I was too. It sets that up, and it sets up issue 40. Yeah, the end of this goes straight into issue 43 extremely well, where you have this dirt being thing. You have all this going on, then you have going into 43 where you have starting off with Sam and Twitch being fired, and you have Banks being like, I told you I'd get you, and Sam and Twitch doing the obvious thing of going public with the evidence, going to the paper, and Jason Wynn kind of getting a little bit ahead of it, but also wanting to make sure that it's not too suspicious. So
that Banks gets thrown under the bus just completely. The wheels come off for Chief Banks in this issue, and again for the political part of the story, it's tremendous. And you can tell McFarlane is having a little bit of trouble writing it, because he does these weird cutaways to kind of the vampire Lestat from Interview with the Vampire movie, where he's like draining the life off of evil creatures around him to build his body back up.
It does set up one of the odder themes of Spawn that gets picked up and dropped a lot, which is Spawn's relationship with kind of insects and predators. Which we've seen a little bit in the past, but right now this is kind of our first big taste where you have this where you have Spawn is still kind of healing, and he's literally in a gothic cemetery-esque place with wolves and bats and cockroaches that he's draining their energy of, so he can get back to full power. And Spawn, honestly, this issue especially takes a bit of a back seat to Sam and Twitch.
And I feel like, again, Mcfarlane is uncomfortable with that. He didn't want to just do a Sam and Twitch issue, so he adds those in there. And it feels to me like Mcfarlane didn't yet feel like he could do an issue of Spawn without the protagonist showing up in some sort of way, shape, or form. Because I feel like it grinds the narrative to a halt every time we have to go check on Spawn in the graveyard, soliloquizing through captions while draining the life off of, like you said, insects and predators. And again, it's just... It's a journeyman writer making a journeyman writer's error. It's not. I feel like I say this so much on this podcast. It's not bad, but it is definitely a sign of Mcfarlane still having certain amateur tendencies. I feel like if he were a little bit more confident, he could have done this entire issue, no Spawn, and just and there wouldn't have been a need for it. And because literally everything with Sam and Twitch, and then Chief Banks and Wynn is gold. You could have said this entire issue in the real world and not had a problem.
Now, that being said, the one plus of that is some fucking gorgeous artwork anytime.
Oh my god, this issue is so pretty. Yeah. This issue is so pretty.
Even though those scenes, I'm agree, like, don't need to be there, it's like, they're also fucking eye candy.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, amazing on that. And yes, again, like you mentioned, because a lot happens, but mostly they get fired, else happens, and you go straight into, end up in the end with Banks committing suicide because he's blamed for everything.
Yeah, like I said, the wheels come off. He realizes that all that protection he's been bragging about for literally 20 issues now is gone. It's snapped away from him. He has made the Patsy the fall guy and takes the coward's way out because everything we've seen from Chief Banks to this point has said this is the motherfucker who will take the coward's way out. Yeah. So it's absolutely, it fits. It's a tremendous issue.
And it's weird here because I almost feel like this is where the volume should end.
Yeah.
Because I don't hate issue.
But they have to be 6 issues.
Yeah, I don't hate issue 44 at all. But the only notes I have for issue 44 is Tiffany strikes.
I forgot what happened in this issue until I've cracked open the volume to give it a quick flip through so we could talk about it. It literally is just Spawn versus Tiffany ends on that dreaded cliffhanger these volumes have not done for a while, but for what we used to complain about early in the show, and a little bit of a clown to remind you that he still exists. It's like you say, it's not a bad issue in by any stretch of the imagination, but it sure is an issue of Spawn.
It is. That is by far a definition of beautiful artwork, Spawn fighting badass chick, and a little bit of other stuff going on in the background. But there's not a ton to talk about that issue because it literally is Tiffany being like, "Hey, you slept with Angela. I'm coming for you first. Then I'm coming for her. I don't think she's as badass as she claimed to be. I don't think you're as badass as they say you are. I'm gonna take you down. You're weak. I'm guessing that's how Angela took down people. It was weak predators taking down weak prey, and I can take down all of you. I'm going against Heaven's rule to prove to them that I'm the most powerful combat angel there is." And that's it. And like it ends with the cliffhanger for starting to decapitate Spawn. It is interesting because I have to take away my love for Angela because we could take away the Angela miniseries and some of the other spin-off stuff. We have not seen Angela proper in Spawn since her issue, pretty much.
It's true, yeah. If you ignore the ancillary titles, we saw her in that one point, and we know that Spawn has had to deal with the Angels before. Speaking of, I think that's probably the highlight of the issue for me, is it feels like Mcfarlane kind of wandered away from the whole Angel plot for a bit. Yeah. The last time we saw the Angels, we basically saw God. Yeah. God was in the Angel Tower, and then they just disappeared for 10 issues. I mean, they've been gone for more or less a year. Yeah. So it was nice to be like, oh yeah, these guys are still a threat too. And look at this one. You thought Angela was badass. Take a look at Tiffany.
I will say,
I'm okay with it.
This is also 43 and 44 in particular are Capullo's and Tony Daniels' art blending the best. Because they it is a one time where that is not Capullo drawing Tiffany in 44, but it fucking looks like it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then they both have to draw, again, predatory beasts in their particular issues, and they look they blend really well. Their styles work really well for both of those monsters. Yeah, and I'm disappointed, but also kind of cackling lightly to myself at the cliffhanger ending again, because by God, they're going to get 6 issues of volume. Doesn't matter where the story actually ends, you're getting 6 issues of Spawn. So to me, that is kind of hilarious, and I've gotten to the point where I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, I'm not against it by any means. It is funny because I think this is not his. I don't know if it's his last work, but I do believe it is Tony Daniels. I know he does some stuff in the next issue, but it's where he starts getting lesser and lesser used, if I remember correctly. Because I think next volume, I know he did 2 issues out of it.
Okay. That's kind of a bummer. I've been enjoying his work.
Yeah, this is also, again, I'm going to go back to, this is where Spawn, for me personally, I love this era of Spawn, where it's, I said at the beginning, it's just Spawn having Spawn adventures in a good Spawn comic. Like, that's not revolutionary, but it's also, it's Spawn in its stride. This is like very much, I hate comparing stuff like this, but it's very much like how I would say like Death of the Family or 0 Year for Capullo and Snyder later on in Batman, where I don't think it's their best work or their most hard hitting, but I also think it's like them hitting their stride. This is, Claremont in probably mid 80s of like some great stories followed by some good Claremont.
So like Outback era Claremont.
Yeah.
I will give you Outback era Claremont. I think you're being a little kind with the Death of the Family 0 Year, but I'll give you Outback era Claremont. Yeah, this is not a volume of Spawn I would be like, you have to try. This is the first issue of Spawn, or the first volume of Spawn you need to try. But if you've read some Spawn and you just want some solid meat and potato Spawn comics, this is definitely that. What was your favorite issue out of the bunch, man?
It's weird to say this. I almost think Fanboy just because it's so fucking different and unexpected.
That's fair. Honestly, I think Fanboy might be my least favorite.
That's fair.
But I totally get why you like it, because the thing that I don't really like about it is how different it gets for those 2 pages, and that's really what's turning your crank. So, obviously a clash of opinions on that, but I totally understand why you're digging on it. I was gonna say Fugitive Part 2 because, again, the absolutely batshit fight with Curse at the end is really what I look for in a Spawn comic. But I'm sorry, I've got to give it to issue 43. I've got to give it to the Sam and Twitch, Chief Banks, political. I mean, it's that to me. I know I literally just said that's the issue that shows that Mcfarlane is still a journeyman writer. But that's as far as like character usage goes. As far as telling a more adult and complex plot and story with these ancillary characters outside of the realm of the supernatural, where he's clearly more comfortable, I feel like that shows a step up for him as a creator and a writer, and I've got to give him props for that. I was deeply, deeply impressed by his handling of those themes in that issue.
Oh yeah, I can agree with that. I totally can. I'm looking forward to the futures, because I realize I think next volume I'm flipping through it and we do get more Cog, we get Trimmer back.
And we get issue 50, which was when I was buying comics, that was the issue where I was like, I am buying Spawn. This is a book I buy every month. And I read issue 50 through, I want to say, 78. So we are getting to my Spawn that I read when I was a kid that I'm really excited to revisit starting next month. I'm super, super stoked about that.
I am too. Yeah, we're getting some great Spawn coming out. And this is still like, it is. We say it's every volume, but it's amazing for the shit that Spawn gets out of now 7 volumes. There has not been a shit volume as far as beginning to end. There's nothing good about this volume.
That's true. The volume I've liked least, volume 6, still had the introduction of Cy-Gor, some really great development with Spawn and Terry and Spawn and Wynn's relationships, the really kick-ass fight with Spawn and Violator. We have yet to come across 6 issues in a row where we were just like, that was dreck.
For me personally, we've only had one truly god-awful, horrible issue, and it's funny because, again, it's the second Houdini issue, where it's just like completely
it's a total fucking mess.
Yeah, that's the only one where, like, to me, there was no merit, there was no nothing. And it is even funnier getting this much further away from that, where it's like, oh yeah, we learned, I think we talked last week, that there was a spin-off series about that character, but never, in the next 30 issues, we haven't seen him. Which is for the best.
Heard of him, heard about him.
Yeah.
There was an oblique mention to why Spawn had a slash in his face that could either refer to the Houdini incident or the Batman Spawn crossover. It's actually left vague enough that the reader is allowed to choose which of those events is the reasoning for that. And I am absolutely on the Spawn Batman crossover train myself.
Oh, I'm much more fan just because at least that book's maybe not be great, but at least I can recommend, hey, this is a crazy crossover that happened in the 90s. It's bizarre and weird.
It's fucking crazy.
I can't for a second be like, read. If anything, I would honestly read all Spawn. You don't need to read the Houdini issues.
Yeah. If you skipped 19 and 20 or 20 and 21, whichever those two issues were, I understand.
Yeah, there
is no reason to ever revisit, talk about those, mention those, acknowledge their existence ever again.
Yeah, no, it's it is interesting that we're almost at issue 50. We'll be at next time when we're wrapping up. We'll be at issue 50. We're making I think next one will be in my head our first big dent into the lore of Spawn. Honestly.
Absolutely. We'll be 50 issues in to Spawn. And again, I know we say this like pretty much every episode. I'm kind of surprised and proud of us that we've committed to this and done this. So, we've kept our schedule the way we promised everyone we would. And I'm also thrilled beyond belief at the number of people who are listening to and discovering Respawn. Thank you all so much for listening to our goofy-ass podcast. It means the world to us, seriously.
It really does, especially I know there's so much stuff going on, and when you have, seems like a new streaming service or a new major podcast every fucking day almost to listen to or watch. It means a lot that you choose.
So addicted to the Kingcast right now.
Is there so many?
It's Eric Vespi and Scott Wampler, two of my favorite movie critics, and they talk about a Stephen King property book and the film adaptation every episode with a guest, and the guest gets to pick which Stephen King they do. I am so obsessed with that podcast right now, man. It's so good.
I just finished my Community binge.
Nice,
not so long
excellent.
Ago. We can talk off mic. I will say I definitely 100% now get why there's been such a call for a movie. Because it was bizarre watching the season finale, or like the series finale, and not having at least like a little bit of a cameo from Donald Glover pop in.
It really is. I really thought that he was gonna make some kind of goofy, smiling, waving appearance.
Even just a little phone call or Skype or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you at least get Shirley having her little thing.
She had a great moment. That her cameo joke was hilarious.
Yeah, like that was great. There's a couple of great moments, and there's a few fun, like really funny about like the evolving cat. Speaking of Spawn, we got Keith David in the final season of Community to tie it back in.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, man, dude. Okay, I'm just going to put this out there. It's something that Colby and I have talked about on and off since literally the first episode of Spawn. Would you guys, and I may have mentioned it on the podcast before, would you guys be interested in a Patreon? And if we did a Patreon, the big thing would be Colby and I would do a commentary for the Spawn movie, and we would also do commentaries for each of the Spawn animated series episodes. Yeah. As well as, God, I'd have to hunt them down, but we talk about the Angela miniseries, the Violator miniseries, Gang War. As I was able to acquire those, or as Colby was able to loan them to me, we don't actually live near each other. Yeah. We would do talk about all the ancillary Spawn tie-in books as well. If that is something that you would possibly be interested in putting some of your hard-earned dosh down to help us out, let us know, and we'll push forward on that.
And, on top of that, we also should mention we've had some very credible and very cool people reach out to us, want to maybe do a possible episode about the toy line and about the figures. Would that be something that you guys would love to hear? Because I know we have had some good reception of that, and people that would like to do it, and we have someone involved that has a much bigger collection than me or Derek. that would
could ever dream to.
Yeah, that would really like to do it. And so if you guys would love to hear it, let us know. Leave some comments below, some feedback. We would love to hear what you would think of that, because we want to do more of this, and especially now where there's more and more Spawn coming out. We have the new Spawn toy lines. We have the ever-present possible movie and possible animated series that who knows that'll ever happen, but
right.
The moment we say it won't happen, it'll be announced like the next day that it starts filming or some shit.
Of course, yeah.
So I don't. Again, in the world of comic movies, especially, we live in a world where we just got a fucking clip of Black Suit Superman last night on Twitter. So, I'm not going to say anything. It's not going to happen anymore.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And speaking of, so if you want to leave us all these awesome comments and criticisms and ideas, you can find us in all kinds of places. Our parent podcast is Blah Blah Comics, Blah Blah Curse Words. This is kind of a spinoff of Colby and I's more or less weekly comics and pop culture podcast. You can find us at Blah Blah Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, where we are facebook.com/Blah Blah Podcast. We're on Twitter, where I am at Blah Blah Pod.
I'm at Hellhound F5.
And we are on Instagram, where I'm at Blah Blah Podcast.
Yes. But I want to say thank you all for listening to this. It means the world to us. Again, leave comments, leave feedback, whatever you want to see in the show. Let us know.
Leave comments on YouTube. We read them. I love YouTube comments. They're literally my favorite thing for this podcast. I don't read them for anybody else's.
Yes. So please leave comments. We will definitely get back to you. But until next time, thank you so much. We will see you in Volume 8, where we will do... Let me double check this here. I should know, because I just looked that up. But yeah, issues 45 through 50. So
Yay!
Let us know what you thought of this volume and what you're looking forward to the next one, and we will see you then.